Hey there! Welcome to the Flute 360 podcast. I'm Dr. Heidi K. Begay, and I'm a flutist, educator, coach, and podcaster. My God-given mission is to serve you. I am passionate about guiding you, the modern-day flutist, to discover your unique voice on and off the stage. The goal of this podcast is to help you thrive, both as an artist and as a musicpreneur. Go ahead and grab some espresso, your favorite notepad, and let's get to it. Today's episode 234 is titled Combating Perfectionism with Dr. Chelsea Tanner.
Hi.
Hey, Chelsea.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. You have such an adorable cat sleeping back there.
Oh, thank you. One of four. This is Gizmo.
Aww.
Yeah. And it's so funny because as flutists, I named him after our little Gizmo king.
Oh, that's right.
And I thought, a cute little gray cat who will embrace that little small Gizmo key. No, this guy is like a bobcat. He is like really, he's big and he's just muscular. I'm like, you are so opposite of a Gizmo key.
That's so funny.
Oh, shoot. But I absolutely love that you are here with me because you and I have watched your work. I have seen you online. We have been online friends for a while, and we actually are in the same room.
I know. It's so exciting. I've obviously this podcast in the flute community is like pretty legendary. So I'm so excited to be on. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're so kind. And, it's crazy because you and I have actually presented at the same festivals, like online. I don't know if you remember this, but during the pandemic, I think it was New Jersey or Montana or something. And you presented, I presented, and we kind of crossed paths. And then other events too. I'm like, I need to just sit down with Chelsea and just do a thing with her because we're always crossing paths with each other.
Yeah. I think it was New Jersey, like 2020 or something like that. Yeah.
It was a while ago, but yeah. And the other thing that's outside of your work, there are so many, because you have a very specific niche, especially like the mindset coach and helping musicians in that realm. I am definitely not in that realm, and I cannot wait to learn from you. But there are so many parallels to what you and I do. It's kind of silly not to know each other. Like it's kind of almost stupid. Like we're podcasting musicians. You have your own podcast, Align Your Mind. You're a flutist with your doctorate, and you're a businesswoman. And so basically, like having you on the show today, I could have spoke with you about like 10 gazillion things. I was like, so basically that's your invitation to come on for the 10 bazillion things.
Okay,
because it's like, what could you and I not talk about?
Right.
Yeah. But we chose on the topic combating perfectionism because that's what the 360ers really want from you. And I'm super excited to deliver that value through their earbuds. So again, for the millionth time, thank you for being here. I can't wait to pick your brain. But yeah, you do all the things. And I'm just so astounded by your career and your business. And thank you for your output.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I think that we're in like a new wave of musician entrepreneurs, especially like in the online space. I think, one of my, seeing like the kind of the range that you offer in the Flute 360 podcast is like, yeah, I'm like, oh yeah, I identify with this like entrepreneur thing. Oh yeah, and this performance thing. And like all of these different facets of, exactly what you speak about. And the people you talk to in this space, it totally hits home to me too. So I'm excited to talk with you.
Yeah. So before we get to specifically combating perfectionism, and if we have time, goal setting, because I know those could be those are two separate topics.
Yeah.
But Please feel free to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, your journey, what you're up to. I would love to hear all of it.
Yeah. So I am a flutist and a mindset coach for musicians. And I'm actually coaching a lot more than I'm doing flute stuff right now, which is really interesting. And I got into this. I have my DMA. Like you said, I was doing like orchestral auditions, really going hard on in that route. And then, I've always loved teaching and I got the opportunity to teach at a university. And I just like fell in love and decided I'm going to get a DMA. And then I had another professor job, visiting professor job, and that ended when the pandemic hit.
Mm.
And after that, I was like, okay, well, nobody's really performing right now. We were all sort of like, what are we all doing? And around that time, I was going through a lot of different stuff mentally. I think burnout from, I finished my DMA the same time that job ended. So I was doing a full time professor job and like finishing my DMA at the same time. I
Wow.
think I was dealing with a lot of different things and just kind of reflecting on like the completion of my my schooling as well. And I think I found coaching work kind of that in fall of 2019 and really dove into it headfirst because I thought it was so helpful and I thought that everyone in music needs to know about this stuff because I was having a really hard time with like the human side of being a musician. Like my
Huh.
thoughts and feelings and my self-talk was not good and my confidence was not where I thought it should be having all these degrees,
Mm.
and having had these positions. And I thought, like I just want to help other musicians feel better
Yeah.
and to have them really feel confident in the thing that they're doing with their lives. Cause I know that there's so much, imposter syndrome and different things that go into music. And I think there's so many different ways we can go about, teaching and coaching and, mentoring people that would really facilitate a positive experience because I
Hmm.
know auditioning, there's so much rejection, right? There's so much competition, there's so much comparison, and no one really tells us how to handle these things. And to have sort of a way
Hmm.
to grasp that and clarity and how I was thinking and how I was feeling really changed the game for me. And I'm just so excited to help any musician who's who's interested.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. What I hear is, and just hearing other flutists and their stories and how because the flute world, yes, it's niche in of itself. Like under this music community umbrella, flute is niche. But then in the flute world, there are so many different sectors that you can go down. You can, be a Kathy Blocky and help with, young kids and flute pedagogy, helping band directors, teaching, performing, mindset coach. And what I'm hearing is, from everyone's stories, they find their niche almost because they were their first like guinea pig,
Yeah.
and a lot of 360 is building your own opportunities as a flutist, really amplifying your voice on and off the stage because my headbanging was getting that job and knowing that I have value and bringing that value to my community in my own unique way and being
Mhm.
okay with that, not necessarily being in one of those traditional roles that you can still be a teacher even if you're not in those four walls, and it's so interesting how I went down that path and then Jane and Joe have their own. But what I hear from your story is like the self-talk, the process that you went through yourself through the audition process, the mindset. And it sounds like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you were your own first guinea pig. And then you realized, hey, there aren't resources out there for this thing. Let me create it for not only myself, but my community so that way other people can flourish.
Absolutely. In coaching, I'm kind of straddling like the coaching industry and the music industry, and we always say like you're your own first client, like your own best first client. Like if you don't know this transformation in and out, like it's going to be difficult to then provide it for someone else, or help someone else
Oh,
through it, right? I think that's true and flute teaching as well. It's like we know how to teach the flute and we know where our students are because we've been
mm,
there.
Yeah.
And I think in coaching, it's so similar too, where, I did have all of the doubts and all of the negative self talk and all of the terrible feelings. And, you know, getting through that was like probably the best thing I could ever do for myself. And I'm like, all I want to do now is help other people through it. So you're right. Like it is really just what I went through, and what I'm passionate about is because I went through it too. And I think it's the same with everyone choosing their niche within, the flute world.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for your work because there are, when I think of like teaching little ones, like I love teaching, but I
Mhm.
really love teaching 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and 40-year-olds, like
Mhm.
pre-professional, professional. That is my niche. I
Yeah.
love little kids. I have a 3-year-old niece, but I can't imagine teaching a little 5-year-old,
Yes. Yeah.
to each their own. And I'm so happy that each expert finds their forte
Mhm.
because we need to all come together and it's a community effort.
Mhm. Yeah.
So you found this path because of your own journey and what you were noticing. So did
Mhm.
you find that there really weren't resources to help you guide you through that process? Is that why you started saying, okay, did you do your own research? Did you like find your own coaches to guide you? Like, what was that like?
Yeah. So I had listened to a couple different podcasts, and the Life Coach School podcast actually was the one that I just devoured all like 400 odd episodes of during the pandemic. And that's where I became certified as a coach. So I went to the Life Coach School to become certified, which is like a 6-month program. And then, they have like business guidance as well, which was very helpful to get kind of a business perspective on, because it's not just coaching, right? It's like if you're basically creating your own business, just like a flute studio is. But I think there's different tools and different things that I didn't actually know about. And that was very helpful. But I definitely got started because I'm just a podcast fanatic. I love them. It's why I started my own. I just like couldn't wait to do that. And I kind of just absorbed all I could. And something within me was just like, this is what it is. Like, this is what
Okay.
you're meant to do. And I felt that really, deeply, and I listened to it. And so I basically, took a 6-month certification and
Mm.
came out the other end just so excited to coach people.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you coach, and correct me if I'm wrong, you coach other musicians, not just flutists.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I will coach any human brain,
Okay.
to be honest.
The
But
reason
most of my clients are musicians in some capacity.
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
Okay. Very
Mhm.
cool. So, like the musicians whom you coach, if you could choose, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
If you could choose like one major pain point, one major hurdle that your clients who are musicians face
Mhm.
on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, what would it be? Like, what does it boil down to?
Yeah, I think most of my clients and people I've talked to, it's about feeling good enough.
Oh,
I
okay.
think that a lot of times we struggle with this concept of I'm not good enough, right?
Okay.
Whether that be in flute, like I'm not doing enough, this idea of scarcity, I think. Like I'm not doing enough, I'm not practicing enough, I haven't done enough in my career, I haven't done all these things that this other person has done,
Mm,
right? I think those thoughts, if practiced, are really detrimental to people's mental health. And I think that especially musicians, we're critiquing ourselves all the time.
mm,
We're getting feedback all of the time, especially in music school. We're literally all the time, which I think is a unique experience. A lot of career paths are not, they don't get that much feedback, right? Like an accountant is not going in every week and being
mm.
judged on their skills, right? It's always at the forefront of what we do, and we're always critiquing ourselves. I think sometimes the lines get blurred between my playing and me.
Oh,
right? So I think a lot of times it's like, oh, I could have done that better. Oh, I like, my playing didn't sound like it should. Not, I didn't sound like I should. Right.
oh,
Like, I think there is a distinction there that if that line gets crossed and we start to think, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I don't like those thoughts are really detrimental because sometimes we think we can out practice them. Like, if I just practice enough,
huh.
then I'll feel good enough. Because in music school, that's all we know,
I
right? Like,
see.
that's all we've been told is like, you'll feel prepared if you practice enough.
I
And
see.
then, but it's not really what we do that creates how we feel, it's how we're thinking about it, right? So if we
Okay.
have this constant idea that nothing is ever enough, then no matter what circumstance we're in our lives, you could even have the big job, right? But if you're still thinking it's not enough, you're still going to feel inadequate. And I think feelings of inadequacy, fueled by comparison and, internalizing criticism personally is what is really the most detrimental part of this and the most common that I've seen, actually.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I had an idea, but it wasn't that. But that's a lot to unpack.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where I'm blown away by, and again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's so true. I'm blown away by the fact that you chose this niche because I'm imagining myself in your shoes being a mindset coach. Like to some degree, I am with flute students, right?
Yeah,
You help
absolutely.
them work through those different thoughts and things like that. But this is like really unpacking
Mhm.
deep thoughts, emotions, and like laying it out, sorting it out, and the fact that like anyone, you, another life coach, can go in and start like diagnosing the problem, identifying it, diagnosing it, figuring out how to break it down, and like, well, what about this or what about that, and looking at it from all these different angles. Oh my gosh, girl, like that's amazing. Do you, with anything, like, it comes with practice, being trained and getting your life coach certification, I'm sure helped a
Mhm.
lot.
Yeah.
How do you hone that craft? Is it just through
Mhm.
practice? Is it by listening to, like what you said, listening to other podcasters? Because to me, like the mind, it's such an expansive area, right? And thoughts and feelings and emotions and unpacking all of it to me is just like, whoa, how
Mhm.
would you even start with that? And not even start with that, but like bring
Mhm.
that person through that journey of here's the problem and let's try to resolve it. To me, it's just mind blowing in a very good way. But it's just to me, I'm like, how does she do that?
Yeah. Well, it seems daunting, right?
Okay,
Like that. I mean, that issue is like what I feel like is the elephant in the room of music, classical music culture in particular that no one talks about,
got it.
right? It's like the human emotions that we feel behind the facade, the professional facade that we present, right? Like
Okay,
to people, right? So it's not talked about very much by very well-known professionals, in my opinion. Not that I've seen a lot of, but when we start kind of unpacking all of this, it is a bit of sorting, right?
okay,
So I break down like everything in the world gets broken down into 5 categories, which is like the circumstances of your life, which are just the facts.
okay,
And this is kind of what we start with, which is what are the facts of the situation and what are my thoughts about it?
okay,
Right? So you can get a really clear on a lot of things and how you're thinking. And this is all about learning about how your brain's operating, right? So if you're thinking a thought about not passing around in an audition, right? The fact is that they just didn't pick you,
okay,
right? Your thought about it is, I can't believe I thought I had a chance, or I'm not good enough, or, right? Like there's all these thoughts that happen from that fact. It doesn't mean any of those things actually,
okay,
right? We're just thinking them. It's just a brain reaction. So I like to think of the brain. I mean, it is just an organ in your body, right? Just like your stomach or your liver. We don't have control over it as much as we don't have control over our stomach and our liver, right? Like we have subconscious thoughts and brain operation that's going on all the time that we're not always conscious of. We
Okay.
can feed it different thoughts, right? We can think intentionally. We can write down, sentences we want to think. We can like feed our brain different things than it knows. But if we don't know to do that, then it's just kind of been on autopilot this whole time, right? And we're just kind of
Okay.
believing all of our thoughts. So a lot of this is noticing what thoughts were coming up and questioning them. Is that
Mm.
really true? Could the opposite be true? And like really getting wiggle room and maybe a little bit different perspective so that this thing that this person has believed they're not good enough and they really have that story and they believe it so deeply, like maybe we create a little bit of room
Mm.
around it so that maybe they're able then to look for proof for how they are good enough, or
Mm.
even just that they play their instrument, because that feels a lot better than saying like, I'm not good enough at it. Right.
I see.
So even just using neutral language instead of like positive affirmations or something like that can be really helpful to rewiring the brain because they're believable. Right.
Okay.
So I always suggest that as like a first step instead of trying to say, I'm really good at what I do. If you don't believe it, then you don't feel it. And it just feels like a mental eye roll of sorts. Right. Yeah.
Founded in Dallas, Texas in 1996, the Carolyn Nesbaum Music Company is renowned for its international service for flutists of all levels. The Carolyn Nesbaum Music Company is your premier resource for everything flute. Their selection of flutes, piccolos, low flutes, and head joints from dozens of makers is truly remarkable. Also, their offerings of sheet music, instrumental accessories, teaching, and health resources are unmatched. Their in house staff offers an unparalleled level of expert knowledge and personal service with an in house repair staff certified in all major brands. Follow the Carolyn Nesbaum Music Company through Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter to be updated with the latest news. Check out their website at fluteforyou.com. The Carolyn Nesbaum Music Company is truly your one-stop flute shop. Yeah. Oh, thank you. That really helps. I
Yeah.
didn't mean to go down that rabbit hole, but just to understand your world and how like you help people, I was really curious and
Mhm.
intrigued by it. And so what I'm hearing is, helping your client realize like, oh, look over here, like look at some of these facts, you
Yeah.
know. So we tell ourselves like, oh, I'm not good enough, right? But let's look at other things to maybe show
Yeah.
us that, hey, like I am worthy of this, or I
Mhm.
am whatever it is, right?
Absolutely.
Huh. That's really interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's never a boring day for you because there's always, right?
Yeah. It is always exciting. I am endlessly fascinated by, emotions and thoughts and feelings and how we operate as humans. And you put an instrument and this classical music world into the mix. Really it is really hard to navigate sometimes. It's really interesting. And I think part of a lot of people's struggles is, having a path set out for them, like you teach or you perform or you're an orchestra musician or whatever. And I love the kind of like the new, like I said, like the new wave of things is like create your own thing, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you can do whatever you want. And I think that thinking that that is good enough and worthy is a huge component to, entrepreneurs, because I think that I'm just as good of a flutist and could do whatever I wanted. I'm choosing to do this,
Yeah.
right? Rather than, oh, this is like a backup plan. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? So I think that there's a lot of coaching involved in that aspect of things too, and career comparison and all of that good stuff.
Oh, amazing. So if I'm
Yeah.
not careful, I could talk to you probably for 3 hours.
Yeah, I
So
know.
all the
Uh,
things. No, I love it. So outside of, you seeing that being a common pain point of your clients. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough. Do you see, maybe today's topic, I'm sure you see it in some fashion through your work, perfectionism and combating that. So I polled my audience, for the listeners out there. I try my very, very best to always tune into y'all's needs. And you voted. I said, hey, what do you want to hear from Chelsea? And they said, combating perfectionism. So here we are. I'm sure you see a lot of this too in your line of work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Okay.
everywhere.
It's okay. So with that, what are some, and I'm using this very loosely, take with a grain of salt, what are the tips and tricks? What advice would you give to a classically trained musician in this arena?
Right. So when we talk about perfectionism, I think it's important to distinguish wanting it to be the best it possibly can
Okay.
and what perfectionism is in terms of like a problematic thing, right? So wanting something to be the best it can could be called perfectionism, right? You spend a lot of time, you're very detail oriented. You can do that in a healthy way, right? But what I think most people think of when they see, like, I have a problem with perfectionism is when nothing, like, when I would say the bar is perfect is like the minimum, right? Like, it's not worth doing unless it's perfect.
Okay.
Like that's where the issue comes in because I think a lot of times we're obsessed, especially as musicians, we're told the entry point is perfection, right? Like in
Mhm.
any audition. So if it's not perfect, it's not worth doing. Right?
Okay.
Like that's kind of the trap we fall into. I think that the idea that something can be perfect is flawed in itself.
Right.
Objectively, perfection does not exist, right?
Right.
Because every person on an audition panel each has a different thought or many different thoughts about what they want to hear or their reaction to anyone's playing, or I like to use the word sound waves because it's super neutral, right? Like their reaction to your sound waves that you put out into the air, like
Hmm.
that is something that I think really kind of holds us back because if we're thinking too much about what other people think, we're not actually thinking about what other people think. That's our thoughts.
Mm.
Right? If we're like, "Oh my gosh, they're gonna think that I play out of tune and they're gonna think these things." It's like, you don't know that. Those are all in your head, right?
Mm.
So, I think that's a really good thing to remember. But perfection in itself can't be objective because it's always an opinion,
Mm.
right? So, someone could play like such an amazing, beautiful phrase and they crack a note. Someone
Mm.
else could play very robotically, get all the notes right, and just not have something extra, and people are gonna have different opinions about who should
Got it.
win that, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that when we think there is some sort of right way to do things, that's a trap
Okay.
because, when we put ourselves out there as musicians or even online on social media thinking there's like a right way to do stuff inherently puts pressure on us. Right? Like,
Yes.
"Oh, I wanna say this in the right way," or, I don't wanna do this wrong," or things like that. So I think that whenever you're thinking, "I don't wanna do it wrong," or, "I wanna do this right," question, like, what would be doing it wrong? Like, what would be doing it correctly?
Right.
And if that's not something you can control, then there's no right or wrong, right?
Mm.
So there's no right or wrong way to do anything technically, right? Because those are opinions. And we're
Yeah.
getting really, like, philosophical, but I think it's helpful because sometimes we do feel trapped by this one way to be or do things
Mm.
that could hold us back because if we do something wrong, well, I think a lot of times we make that mean something about ourselves.
I see.
And that's what we're scared of, right? Feeling
Okay.
badly about ourselves. So there's so many layers to this, but I think generally questioning what is perfection, how do you know when you get there? Right?
Yeah.
Like if someone wants to make something perfect, then have a goal for that, right? Like in music,
Okay.
I say, like if you don't know how you want to sound, like how you want to make this phrase sound, and you're just trying stuff, like that's great.
Yeah.
But we got to make a decision, make a plan.
Okay.
and then implement. But if you're like, oh, I just want to get all the notes and rhythms perfect,
Mm,
that in itself, I think, is difficult because when you're in that mode, it's so easy to, if something goes wrong, if your goal is notes and rhythms, everything falls apart.
yep.
Right. So I think that because there is a tangible right and wrong notes, things like that, I think that those are some of the traps that I see. I also like to break, wrong notes down further and make them even more neutral and say, like, the note I played didn't match the one on the page.
Ooh,
Not that it was wrong,
yeah.
but I think that if we tell ourselves that we were wrong for like 3 hours a day, it really adds up, So
Yeah.
I think that making sort of like a gray area, knowing that you're playing alone isn't going to magically make everything perfect for you, right?
Yep.
Like everyone is going to react to your playing differently and you can't control it at all. I
Hmm.
think we're told that if we play well enough, we'll win, right?
Yeah.
And that's just never the case because everyone is going to have thoughts based on their own framework about our
Okay.
play,
Okay.
right? So like
Yeah.
our playing meets their framework. Sometimes it jives, sometimes it doesn't.
Hmm.
But when we're focused on what other people think or whether we can do it right or wrong and what that means about us, like
Hmm.
when our focus is there, everything feels bad
Yeah.
and really pressurized. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's sort of my take on perfectionism as a whole. And I think that sometimes we like to solve for things like imposter syndrome with perfection, right?
Okay.
Like if I just don't play any wrong notes and if I just don't mess up, then I'll be good enough, right? Or
Mm,
maybe if I can be perfect, then I'll feel better,
okay.
right? Or we try to solve for emotions with these like actions, right?
Okay.
But unless we think that that was good, we're
Hmm.
not going to feel better.
Okay.
Just kind of like I like to give this example, like if you've played a concert and you didn't think it went well, and someone comes up to you like, "Oh, that was amazing. I loved it so much." You were like, "Were you not here? Were you in the same room?" Right? We don't believe them because
Yeah. Yeah.
we have thought our thoughts create how we feel. So when we don't think we did well, no amount of outside input is going to change unless we change our mind about it.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up because I kid you not, I just started probably 3, 4 months ago a TikTok account.
Oh yeah.
And it's kind of nice because, and you've got way more videos than I do,
Oh,
but it's kind of nice because, podcasting, you being a podcasting musician and life coach, most of my podcasts are like 20 minutes, 40, 60, whatever. TikTok is just this quick little reel under 3 minutes, super fun. One of my most popular downloaded TikTok videos is what I titled Post Concert Compliments, and really encouraging people like to be aware of like the language they use in response to a compliment, their
mm,
body language. Because what I was noticing with a particular student in my studio, whenever I gave him a compliment after playing something out of a Kathy Blocky book or a solo that I gave him, I would go, "Oh my goodness, Joe, this is amazing. Congratulations. I loved you." And I'll give them very specific things. "I really loved your fuller tone in measures, blah, blah, blah. Let's work on those triplets in measure 16, kind of the Oreo thing, compliment. Let's work on
yeah.
something, compliment, right?" And every single time I give him a compliment, Chelsea, I kid you not, he will tell me that I'm lying to him. He will flat
Mm,
out, and it's such a strong response. And he'll tisk, or he'll scrunch up his face, or he'll just get really annoyed and
mhm.
upset that I gave him a compliment. And I share this through TikTok, and all the 3 6 years who follow me through TikTok are like, "Yeah, I resonate with this child,"
Yeah.
because we tend to be so highly critical of
Mm,
ourselves and our playing. And, as and and I told everyone, like, don't worry, I'm working with my student on this because I want him to feel confident, empowered when he plays and things like that. It's okay to be objective, but at the same time, it's not okay to beat yourself up because you made a mistake. So in his mind's eye is, if it's not perfect, don't give me a compliment, you know? And what you're saying, you know, even with this like post-concert compliment, like, did you, you know, someone says, oh, good job, Chelsea, you did amazing. You're like, were you in the same room? You know,
Yeah.
Accepting that and starting to be okay with, even though, okay, yeah, you missed that note or you cracked that E or whatever, being okay with saying, thank you. I really appreciate you coming. I really appreciate your words of gratitude. I really appreciate that. That I would think is a good should. I think that should be in our language. I think that should be incorporated into receiving that, because it's only going to boost us up. It's only going to make us feel amazing to share our music with people who enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to add on to that, to also choose to know that your playing has value, whether it was perfect or not.
Boom.
You
Yeah.
know, like that is something that we're not really taught. Right? You know, that's something that
Yeah.
I've had to come to thinking like, okay, do I still think that what I have to offer is valuable if it's not exactly 1,000% perfect, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I do. I think so. And I think that that's a mind shift, but I think kind of the first step to that could be curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you do feel like, you know, if you're listening to this and you feel like this student who can't see past the mistakes, get curious about who's giving you the compliment.
Mm-hmm.
I like, oh, this person said it. Like, I wonder what, you know, like, was that true what they said? And could my playing still be good and still have value, even like despite this note or rhythm or articulation that didn't come out or whatever it is, right? I think, you know, what you described is a little bit of like all or nothing thinking, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is it's either perfectionism, right? Or it's garbage,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And so what I love to see is like the nuance of all of
Mm.
it, right?
Mm.
I can crack a note in a performance and not make it mean that I failed.
Yeah.
I just my air went too fast,
Yeah.
right? Like, you know, like okay, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. But I mean, I didn't used to think that way. You know,
Yeah.
I think that that's important too, where it's totally possible to think differently and believe different things. And sometimes even the first step is saying like, oh, it's possible that I'm going to accept my playing and value my playing regardless of any like conventional like conventionally perceived flaw, right?
Mhm.
I think that, you know, flaws are also an opinion. There's so much we could talk about, but I think that really valuing our own craft and what we do, regardless of its quote unquote imperfections, is
Mhm.
really important because if that's the foundation, like a cracked note will be like the last thing on your mind when you're going in, right? What you're creating will be the thing on your mind rather than
Yes.
what's going to go wrong. Yeah.
Oh, 110%. Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, and I hope you resonate with this to some degree because you are a podcasting musician.
Yeah.
That's what podcasting taught me. And that's what business has taught me. One of my business coaches, you know, here I was trying to perfect this course and blah, blah, blah. And of course, you want to put out a good product. And
Yeah.
she was just like, what we call in the business world is your least viable product. What's the least viable product you can get out hot and messy, get it out there? Because
Mhm.
if we sit too long on that remote course or that ebook or whatever, you will never hit publish. You will
Oh,
never
yeah.
put it up on the website. You will never market it because it will never be, quote, good enough. And
Mhm.
so in business, it's almost opposite from our classically trained music world. It's
Yeah.
like, get it out, you know, throw that spaghetti on the wall, see what sticks, and then, keep tweaking it along the way. Same thing with podcasting. It's like,
Mhm.
if I were to fret about every if I were to fret about every restart of a sentence or a word, I would not be at episode 230. There,
Seriously.
like, oh my gosh, can you imagine?
I
And,
know.
and so I have a podcasting class that teaches people how to build a podcast to claim that piece of digital real estate.
Mhm.
But the more I talk with you in this conversation, there is something in me where there's more possibilities with podcasting for musicians, helping to diminish performance anxiety, helping to diminish this idea of perfectionism,
Yeah.
getting your ideas out there, knowing that you do have value, you do have a voice. Because I kid you not, Chelsea, like, my flute playing has blossomed exponentially because of being a podcasting host.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Being okay with, like, the dialogue, being okay with listening to you and giving you space as a host, listening to your energy, matching that. Think about what we do in ensemble work.
Yeah.
Being okay with inflecting this or getting excited about that, talking with my hands, all of
Yeah.
these things, and everything we're talking about today, to bring it full circle. So that way I'm not losing anybody here. And they're like, oh my gosh, Heidi, what the heck are you talking about?
No.
It's, all of these things of air quote perfectionism and imposter syndrome. It's like, knowing that the value that 360 can bring to people and the voice that I can bring, I want that for everybody. I want them to know, like, you have a unique voice, you have a unique skill set that you could bring to the world, to bring to your tribe. And through podcasting, it's taught me how to not worry about that cracked note. It's
Yeah.
taught really seriously, because the big
Yeah.
scheme of things, it's like, did I share something today? Did I bring value today? Did I tell a story today? Did I
Yeah.
bring one gem that could really move the needle forward for that listener? And that's
Mhm.
what you're saying
Yeah.
with the storytelling, with the sharing of your music to that panel, to the audience. And
Yeah.
there are so many parallels. I could be here forever, but how does that sit with you?
Yeah. No, I feel exactly the same. I think, if you have a business, especially, I think that is that I use things all the time in that, because social media posts going out, I have it used to overthink, like,
Mm,
what's this person? Oh, this famous flutist followed me. What do they think? Right. All of that stuff goes on in my head, and I have to, sort it out like I do, with my clients. I get coached myself, all these different things. And what I've noticed is saying the thing I need to say that I think will help someone is
mm,
what's important. How I say it doesn't matter as much,
yes.
right? So it's sort of like when I teach as well. If I have a student, I'm going to tell them one way to do something one way, but I'm not concerned with how perfect the words were that formed from my mouth to tell them this concept, right? I'm worried, like, did they get it? Do they get
Okay.
this thing that I'm trying to say, that what I know is going to help them?
Okay.
Right. And I feel the same way with social media. I feel the same with music too. Right.
Mm.
Like, what I'm trying to convey is not like a G sharp to an A, right? It's that, who cares?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
It's a
what
half
I'm
step.
right? What the work that I think is so amazing with, like, practicing and this whole process of being a musician is pulling apart the music, making it mean something to us, really having a plan for how we want to convey it, with the influence of all of the teachers and flutists and musicians that came before us, like, having all of that, and then having it go through us, having us, you know, plan out, what do we want to do? How do we want to sound? Why do you like this? Why do you like that? And at the end of it, create something you really love that is
Mm.
truly a part of yourself that you can share with other people. I cracked a note. So what? Right? Like,
Yeah.
at that point, it's like, seems ridiculous. And I
Yeah.
and I get that from, social media. If I learn something and I'm excited, I'm like putting it out. I don't care if people get it. Right?
Yeah.
They might get it, they might not. Like, some people are 5% of my followers are gonna see it. Two of them are gonna resonate with it. Maybe a couple of them share it, right? Like, who knows? But it
Yeah.
doesn't mean yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
mean I'm not gonna put it out there, because I think that's where the magic is, right? So
Mm.
I think perfectionism is like the surface level stuff that we get caught up in, that if we really do sit and say like, okay, what do I think about this? How do I want this phrase to go? And you contemplate like, what does my vibrato sound like? How do I want to sound? What recordings do I like? Why do I like them?
Mm,
And really building something and crafting something that you like, there's no perfectionism in that because it's not right or wrong. It's like, do I love how I sound? You
mm.
know? And I think that's such a good question to ask yourself in the practice room too.
Ooh, I love that.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for unpacking all of that for
Yeah.
us.
So I've thought about this so much.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
know you have. And these are
Yeah.
topics very similar to what you discussed through Align Your Mind, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So can you tell people like where they can find you and your podcast? Because I want people to be able to digest and consume your wonderful information.
Yeah. So I have a podcast called Align Your Mind. It's wherever you get podcasts. And I have a coaching program. I have a 12-week one-on-one coaching program where you can work through all of the things we talked about in this episode. But also, I teach flute lessons and incorporate all of this in that too. So I also have a flute studio that's very mindset focused and very conscious of the thoughts and feelings of every student that I take on. And
Hmm.
I really love, combining those worlds. My website is chelseatanner.com and my Instagram, which is where I post most things, is at _ Chelsea Tanner. So yeah, if you're interested, check out Align Your Mind. And if it resonates with you, if it's something that you feel like could help you, I offer like a free discovery call. So, we can chat about where you are, where you want to be, and how you can get there. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
And you have a very lovely, sweet gift for the 360ers today. You are an author. You have two flute books. I have purchased one of them. You wrote it so beautifully. I absolutely love it. And with that being said, being an author and you being here today, tell the 360ers about your gift.
Yeah, so I have a series of flute fundamental books. And the one that I have a couple of pages, free pages preview of is all about phrasing and musicality. And that one I love because this is sort of an elusive concept sometimes, right? Like, what is musicality in itself? It's sort of something we can't quite always catch, but I break it down really tangible steps. Um, how to build a phrase, how to create a line, what does that mean? What even is a line? All of that stuff. So I love, tangible steps and tools to kind of have in your back pocket at any given point to solve technical problems, to solve any sort of issue where you're wanting to sound different in your practice.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And by hearing you say that out loud, I was actually reminded because I did this probably 2 years ago, but there is a series through 360 just on boosting your musicality and things like that.
Mhm.
So I want to send you those links so that way
Yeah.
you can listen to those episodes and tell me what you think. I'm kind of curious now. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, thank you so much for the preview. We really appreciate
Mhm.
that. And what
Yeah.
I'll do is just to make it easy peasy for everyone, you sent me the link in an email, and I'm going to go ahead and put that in the show notes below. So if you're curious for that preview, it's going to be down there in the show notes. And in good Flute 360 fashion, Chelsea, you may or may not remember this. Sometimes I do with my guests, and if you have a hot second, I would love to ask you what your pick of the day is. It could be your favorite TV show, serial, movie. It could be anything under the sun.
Gosh. Um,
Is there a book you're reading or a favorite movie?
I have a podcast recommendation actually.
Okay.
It's called Maintenance Phase. And it really goes into it's all about sort of like the myths of, if I just find this fascinating, it's two journalists who discuss like the myths of like diet culture and how we see ourselves, and like maintenance phase is sort of this sort of like how do we exist in this society where, where there's so many cultural pressures and norms that we never really question. And it's a very interesting lesson. So highly recommend that.
Oh, cool. Great recommendation. I can't wait to check
Yeah.
it out.
Yeah.
You are a diehard podcast listener, aren't
Oh
you?
my gosh. I was like, well, what do I do? Yeah, I listen to podcasts all the time.
No, that's
Yeah.
amazing. My favorite time is putting makeup on in the morning, listening to my favorite podcast in the morning, first 30, 60 minutes of the day.
Nice. Yeah, I do that too.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, talents, and expertise. And we really, really appreciate it. For all the listeners out there, I'm going to put down in the show notes Chelsea's website, Instagram handle, all of that. So feel free to connect with her if this information really has resonated with you. And thank you, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun to talk to you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review through your favorite podcast app, such as Apple, Spotify, and iHeartRadio, among others. Thank you. Let's talk about Flute.